batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. We are up to episode 9. And first of all, let me say hi to Jeff. Jeff, how are you doing?
Hi, Jeremy. I'm dealing with a damaged instrument to a buyer, so
we were
that's
just
a bummer.
Lamenting on he's selling. You know how, well, both of us have this addiction to buying and selling gear. And this is one of the downfalls when you sell gear and something goes wrong, and now you got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so that's where Jeff is, and I can relate. And so what was it? It was a guitar that the neck is separated.
2008 Les Paul.
Okay.
Faded, which meant that it's chambered, so it's not so heavy.
Right.
60s neck, pearly gates pickups, just upgraded the pots. It was just a nice feeling, nice sounding guitar.
Right.
So, it's the worst. You get that email.
You got it.
The buyer's like, "Hey, man,
yeah,
this wasn't what I expected."
I've had
me either, man.
I've dealt with that too. So, and I'm going to bring in. Let me bring in our guest today. Now, Greg is our special guest, and our show is devoted to Greg. But here at the beginning, the preamble part, I want Greg involved here too, because Greg's also a musician, and he can relate. So, Greg Foeller is our guest. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Great. And he's joining us from Denver today. His home is sunny Southern California.
Yeah.
And he's a do we call you a recording engineer, audio engineer? What do we
Audio engineer, recording engineer, whatever.
Awesome. Perfect. And so we're going to get to Greg for the main portion of the podcast, but we just thought we'd bring him in here at the beginning for all of the opening festivities as well. So Jeff, we are rooting for you on this issue with your guitar. You'll have to let us know how it happens.
I appreciate it.
I think you mentioned we have a few news headlines today.
Yeah, I dug up some.
Okay,
surely.
Let's hear. And Greg, you are welcome to comment on these if you have opinions on any of these. So we're just throwing them right in. He didn't know he was going to have host duties.
What I found today, I had no idea. Bon Scott from AC/DC was in a band called Fraternity before AC/DC.
Okay.
And I suppose they recorded 2 albums pre-AC/DC, and there's some unreleased material that they dug up.
Wow.
And so I believe it's on Spotify today. I found it.
Really?
It's called Fraternity Seasons of Change, 45 songs.
Now, is Bon
pretty cool?
Because I know at one point he was a drummer. Is he drumming on this? Because I've actually seen videos of Fraternity on YouTube, and they're not like AC/DC. So if you're expecting AC/DC, they're kind of a 70s glam.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to call them disco, but almost bubblegum. They're kind of like a sweet. Mm-hmm. A less macho version of the Sweet.
I didn't listen to too much.
The video I saw, he's not playing drums. He's like he's not singing lead. He's kind of like a background singer guy, and he's wearing real tight polyester. I mean, it's total 1974 or 72 or what. That's awesome.
I read that he had more of that bubblegum band pre-Fraternity.
Oh, so maybe this is the wrong band then. Maybe I saw a pre-Fraternity band, but either way, I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. I thought this was kind of interesting. Pearl Jam is basically threatening to sue a UK tribute band called Pearl Jam with 2 M's.
Oh,
for some reason. Pearl Jam have been doing their thing for like 5 years.
Wow.
And nobody said anything. And all of a sudden, for some reason, they're claiming, they're saying cease and desist, change your name.
So let me ask you this, and we're all none of us are legal scholars, at least I don't think so. And Greg probably has some thoughts on this. Is a cover band, is a tribute band hurting or helping the band? I mean, I have a thought on that. I think they're helping the band. I think they're promoting the band's music. And if I was in Pearl Jam, my personal thought is that's great that there's a tribute band out keeping our music alive, playing it to folks. I don't know. Greg, what do you think?
I guess it's probably opinion, and it could really go either way depending on the talent abilities of the band. If they're really terrible, you might be turning off people to the music. But if they're really good, like you said, they're perhaps exposing people to the music that otherwise wouldn't have listened to it.
That's a good point. You guys both in Colorado today, there's a video on YouTube of the Brit Floyd, the Pink Floyd tribute band playing at Red Rocks. That is phenomenal. I mean, it is phenomenal. And I'm sure they have some legal arrangement with Pink Floyd because they've been doing this for years. And of course, every tribute band says this, but they're considered like the best Pink Floyd,
the one
tribute band. And it's awesome
to play Red Rocks. Yeah.
So yeah,
you gotta have it together.
Yeah.
You're pretty big time if you're playing Red Rocks.
I guess the band was selling merchandise, like using the same font.
Okay.
And some other artistic thing that
they're probably running into copyright
so they were taking
issues.
it a little farther.
Yeah. So I hadn't thought about that angle. I'm thinking of just the band playing, and maybe that's the reason behind the case is they're selling rip off. Check out that hat, by the way, that you're wearing. Now our listeners can't see it, but for those of you that can't see it, Jeff is wearing a hat. It looks like the Gibson guitar logo. Okay. So it looks, if you look close, you think it's a Gibson hat, but it actually says Gibbons.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's the Reverend Willie G. That's Billy Gibbons,
indeed.
A reference to Billy. But,
yes.
Here we are talking about copyright infringement, and our own friend Jeff is guilty of it right here.
Is it me or the maker of the hat?
It's well, there you go.
Yeah. Jeff's off the hook.
He's off the hook. You're off the hook. You're the victim here. You're the victim. You thought it said Gibson when you bought it. So
yeah. Well, that's the thing I was going to bring up with Pearl Jam. With all the M's. I'm actually reading this book about publishing and all about music business. So where you're absolutely right. I'm not an expert, but I have learned a little bit of things from it so far. And if you have a name that's even similar enough to where it confuses people into thinking they might be getting the original, that's where you run into a lot of legal issues too.
Yeah.
Like they could have like Pearl Jam or something like that. And that's close enough to where it could confuse people into thinking like, oh, we're buying Pearl Jam's records or this or that. And you get a Pearl Jam record and you're let down. And
I think I read that they're changing their name. I don't know if they've actually done it to Legal Jam.
Legal Jam. Okay. Legal Jam. I kind of like that.
One M on that, though.
They're in a legal jam. That's good. One of the episodes, I think episode 6, I was talking about Riot. Riot's been around since the mid-'70s, and they're in New York. And they had a great, don't get me on Riot. I love Riot. And they should be considered one of the classic metal bands, but they just aren't. They just never, for a number of reasons. Go listen to episode 6 and we lay that out. But when they released their album, Born in America, which is a pretty good album, this was at the time when Quiet Riot literally had the #1 album with Metal Health. And so they put stickers on, and I don't know if they were required to do it, but to Greg's point,
it might have been.
How many, and that could be why, because someone might have saw that Quiet Riot video. I'm going to go buy it. And then they go see this album Riot. And so there was a sticker on there that actually said, "This is not Quiet Riot." So it might have.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they've both been around about the same amount of time, from the mid 70s. It just happened to be that one band got really popular and one didn't. But that's interesting that comes into play there. So it, something that would confuse the buyer, especially if it's intentionally.
Yeah.
We could do a whole episode on that kind of thing, and also songs that have been
absolutely
borrowed from quote unquote.
Oh gosh,
borrowed. It's such a nice word.
We could do and I love Led Zeppelin, but right there's a whole episode out there that we could do about Led Zeppelin. I'm not even going to say borrowing, stealing. Right. I mean, they would put other people's songs, old blues guys' songs, on their albums, and then say they wrote them.
So they wouldn't give them credit.
They would not give them credit. Now, over the years, they've made recompense. They've gone back and made some changes on some of these things, but most of these blues guys died penniless, right? Because a lot of these Brit guys that really borrowed heavily from those blues men didn't give them the credit they deserve.
Yeah,
so
anyways, that's not cool, man.
It's a long story.
Yeah.
So any other news items, Jeff?
Phil Spector died.
Oh, I saw that. Now, Greg, don't want to put Greg on the spot, but Greg, because he's a audio engineer, and this is kind of one of my questions. In your education, right? How far back do you guys go? I mean, is that part of what you learned? You go back and listen to old stuff, and Phil Spector's known for this whole wall of sound. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, is that part of the education you guys go through? Do you go back into history, or do you just kind of start from now?
Well, the engineering side is more kind of diving into the science of it. Mm-hmm. So when I was in school for that, man, sometimes I thought I was studying to be a doctor. We learned about the inner workings of the ear. Sometimes I thought I was studying to be an electrician, learning Ohm's law and all of that stuff. And we learned so much in depth, so much of the science. And I don't think, if I'm remembering right, 'cause it was still probably 8 or 9 years ago when I was in school, I don't think we dove too much into studying producers. There was one part of a class where one of our assignments was to look up a producer and do kind of a little report on it. Mm-hmm. Maybe one that we didn't know so well, just so we could learn some things about it. But we didn't really study that so much. It was a lot more of the science side of audio rather than the kind of history, the music, and all of that.
Gotcha. Now, Jeff's background and education is also similar to what you do. He's more kind of in the film side, but he's also an audio production guy. So I'll ask the same question to you, Jeff. I mean, is that part of, you probably did it from a film standpoint. I'm thinking is, as you learned, you kind of went back and look at these historically, these masterpieces, right, in the field.
Yeah, we would go back and listen to the sound design. Mm-hmm. That a sound editor or supervising sound supervisor would do, right? Would add. So we would listen to like Foley. We would listen to all these examples of what they had done in the past, just for like a baseline in a way. But the production side of audio, we only had maybe a few classes in the actual engineering part, but we did touch upon some of that science and things like that, which was really awesome.
And you know what's awesome? Sorry, I'm a total nerd, guys. But what's awesome, especially when you look at like old time radio, when you talk about Foley, when you listen to old radio shows, there would literally be a guy that his job was standing over on a little wood floor, making noise. So walking up like Monty Python guys.
Exactly.
There's a guy over there. He's walking up steps. If someone falls over, he's making noises. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. It's kind of one of the things I wanted to do, but there's like 6 people.
Do it.
Yeah.
There's a handful of small, it's a small club.
Your job is to rub your hands together over here.
Yeah.
It's like,
we actually kind of did that in school too, because there were so many different areas. It wasn't just focused on music. They focused on video game audio as well as film audio. and we had a class in Foley, ADR, and all that stuff. And we took a segment of, I think the film was, I can't remember the film. Anyways, we removed all of the audio and completely did our own Foley, which I thought was so much fun.
That is so cool.
So much fun.
It was great.
Yeah.
And then the ADR replacing the dialogue and then scored it too. So that was pretty cool.
I could totally nerd out right now because
Avatar. That's what it was.
I love like the spaghetti westerns, right? The old Clint Eastwood movies, where if you notice, like Clint Eastwood's the only guy speaking English. Everyone else, it's dubbed, and it's so hilarious to do that. And like, I took a TV production class. This is 85, right? When I graduated high school, our teacher, he brought in, it was the raw footage of an episode of Gunsmoke, like a fight scene, it was just raw footage. And what our assignment was, is we were supposed to put together a fight scene, editing it all together. And it was the coolest thing in the world because we had 20 people in the class and they were 20 completely different fight scenes.
Yeah.
And it was really
it's
cool.
so super creative, it's so awesome.
Okay. So when we come back, we're going to actually interview Greg. Okay. And Greg's, I think, got a really interesting background and story to share with us. So that's all coming up when we come back on the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Well, welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. This is episode 9. I forgot to mention, and Jeff, you're supposed to remind me about this. You can become a patron of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast on Patreon. Our goal is to make $9 a month. Okay, so that's 3 patrons. We don't have any patrons yet. Okay, so you could be one. You could be one of the first patrons. $9 a month is our goal. So check us out at Patreon. We'll put a link there. And as always, you can always reach us by email at classicguitarrock@mail.com. So our guest today is Greg Foeller. And let me just tell you how I know Greg. Greg had the unfortunate position of having to sit through training classes with me. When was that? That would have been about 2008, maybe?
Yeah, right around there, 2008, 2009, maybe.
So Greg was a supervisor. We both worked for a company that runs call centers all over the place. And Greg was a supervisor and I was a trainer. And so he had to sit through a bunch of classes with me. He was well behaved. He turned me on to Blind Guardian, by the way. He
yes,
Blind Guardian, and I can't say I'm a huge fan, but I can say I am a fan, and I like to check out Blind Guardian. They're German, right?
Yes, I am so stoked you remember that.
And no, I still have the CD. It's in my car. I still have it. It's a copy that Greg burned for me. And very interesting. And I've gone and watched the live stuff from Wacken when they played there. So he kind of turned me on to that. But Greg, I remember Greg telling me way back then that his goal was he wanted to get into audio engineering and recording and that sort of thing. And then before I knew it, it seemed like he's in LA going to school for that. And so that's awesome. So I'm going to shut up. And Greg, I want you to kind of give us your background, what music you were into as a kid, and just walk us through going to LA, going to school, getting your foot in the door at the studio, and just tell us your life story.
Cool. I'll try to condense it as much as I can.
Not your whole life.
I'll be here way too long.
Yeah.
First off, I'm so happy you brought up Blind Guardian. That's great. Okay. Growing up, my mom and dad always played such great music, and I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, but I remember specifically I had to be around like 7 or 8 or something. My mom had this Eric Clapton VHS, and I would just play Layla over and over and over. And it was a version that spliced, you might be familiar with this or not, but it spliced like a bunch of different live performance of Layla all together in this one, and it was the coolest thing. And I just remember running around the house, air guitaring to that nonstop. Probably wore out the VHS. And that was probably about when I started getting interested in guitar, at least. And she had an acoustic guitar around the house, and I would occasionally play that. No clue what I was doing. I think I learned Smoke on the Water. That was probably one of the first.
Yes.
Of course. That's like the
course.
first riff anyone learns.
And we learn it wrong too.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I probably still haven't learned it right. And then my dad, I remember one time he came home like right around when CDs were probably becoming more popular. He just got a CD player for the family, and he came home with Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits.
Nice.
And I got hooked on that. Scarborough Fair. Couldn't play that enough. And mom would always play Lindsey Buckingham. She played a lot of Fleetwood Mac growing up, and at the time I didn't really care for it. Eventually got into guitar pretty heavy. And then, Jeremy, you're probably not going to like this. I listened to some of your earlier podcasts where you were talking about certain band you didn't like. For the first 10 years of my guitar playing and like really my own music listening was nothing but Metallica.
I knew that. Yes.
Nothing but Metallica. Like to the point where my sisters would be like, there are other bands. You have to listen to somebody else, anybody else. We don't care. As long as it's anyone other than Metallica. Let's see. This was probably around 95, maybe?
Okay.
95. Oh, but how I got into them. Dad had an ex-girlfriend who had a son that was older than me. And because he was older than me, he's automatically cooler and you want to be just like him. And he played guitar. Actually, this is probably going into me getting into guitar more too. My cousins played a little bit. I'm kind of going off in all these different tangents.
No,
sorry. Fine. But this kid, TJ, played guitar and he was playing this riff that I had never heard anything like it. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. If you're familiar with Metallica's Sanitarium from the Master of Puppets album, he was playing that opening riff and I was dumbfounded. I was like, what is this? This isn't Fleetwood Mac. This isn't Simon and Garfunkel. Anything else I've been listening to? And he's like, oh yeah, that's Metallica. And I'd heard the name Metallica before and I just figured like, oh, that sounds scary. They sound like growly. I don't want to listen to that. And so I had this uncle that was really into heavy metal. And so I was like, I bet you he knows who that is. So I asked him, hey, do you know what this is? And I played it on one of his guitars and he's like, yeah, that's Metallica. And he hands me the Master of Puppets album. And I was pretty young. And I just remember going home and laying down on my carpet, popping it in the CD player. It was like a little bubble CD player and just sitting in front of it. Yeah. And then Battery starts out that beautiful classic that intro. Have no idea what's coming. And then the heaviness kicks in and just pummels me. And I could not stop playing that CD. And from that moment on, it was 10 years of nothing but Metallica. Nothing but Metallica.
Have you seen him live?
About 12 or 13 times.
Yeah. So he's a fan.
Nice.
Yeah.
Not enough. But
and here's the thing with Metallica. There's a few bands like this. I like I've watched that documentary. What's that documentary?
Some Kind of Monster.
I've watched that. I love that documentary. I love the guys in Metallica. I do. I love James Hetfield. I'm the same way with Alice Cooper. I love Alice Cooper. I watch interviews. I just am not a huge fan of Alice Cooper's music. I'm not a huge fan of Metallica's music. I mean, I know they're great. I know they're huge. I like them more than their music. So I don't want you to think I'm a Metallica hater. I'm just
That's good. I was going to spend the whole time trying to convince you.
That's awesome. So at some point you get a little older, you're in high school and stuff. When did you decide, hey, I want to be an audio engineer? What brought that?
Okay. So I was playing guitar a lot. That was pretty much my entire life. Then I discovered skateboarding and guitar kind of took a back seat for maybe a couple years, but it was still always one of my biggest passions. And I play guitar here and there. And then finally I started kind of doing them more around the same level, 50-50, as opposed to primarily skateboarding. And just got into a lot of writing my own songs and stuff. I always thought that was fun. And I used this video editing program, this program I used to edit my skate videos on called Final Cut Pro. Mm-hmm. I was using the audio tracks of that as like a DAW to like record one guitar part. And then I was like, okay, so if I play with that, then I can add. It's kind of being your one-man band or writing multi-tracking by yourself because you're alone or something. But so writing music got me into needing to record it because I have a terrible memory. And this podcast would probably be a lot more interesting if I had a better memory. But that also led to me doing what I'm doing today because I couldn't remember my songs, so I had to record them. And the recordings were such terrible quality. And I was always just like, man, this doesn't sound good at all. Like I need to start looking into this. So I got as many books as I could to improve my recording, like Complete Idiot's Guide to recording for dummies, as many as I could. And I learned a lot from those, but there's really only so much you can learn. So I would start kind of shadowing people in this. I think this was still pretty well before YouTube. So it's not like you can just go type something in and be an expert on it, you know?
Did you eventually start using GarageBand or Logic Pro?
I did eventually start using GarageBand, and I actually worked at a church for a while as an audio engineer for their live sound. And this was well before I knew anything about it. I just happened to be the only one that was interested in it.
Right.
So, which I think is probably oftentimes the case at church.
They said he's got long hair. He can run sound. Yeah.
He looks like he likes music or something. Yeah. I don't know. Put him behind the board.
That's right.
Does he know what he's doing? No, whatever. We'll figure it out. And I also worked at this church's radio station, and they had Logic, and I was like, oh, sweet. I can finally upgrade GarageBand. So I used Logic quite a bit. And then at some point it just got to a point where I still needed to learn a lot more. And I really wanted to. I was very interested in it. And I was like, I've pretty much got to where I can from reading books about the limit that I can learn from that. So I looked into going to audio engineering schools and whittled it down to 3 different ones, did a lot of research on which would probably be the best for me. And I found this school in Phoenix, Arizona called the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences. A really, really cool place. So I went there, and it was a pretty accelerated program. It was like 9 months. That was kind of one of the appeals as opposed to the other schools. Some of the other schools were 2, 3, 4 years long.
Right.
And I figured, all right, so if they're jamming all this knowledge into my brain for 9 months, I'll be out in the field that much sooner than I would with the other schools. And everyone knows you're going to learn a lot more in the actual field than you are in a classroom. Right. Even if the classrooms are professional recording studios, which most of them are, you know, it's always going to be a little bit different when you're in an actual session situation rather than a graded classroom situation. So I went out to Phoenix, Arizona, didn't know anybody out there. I was just like, yeah, this is the place I got to be. Goodbye comfort zone. Right, goodbye all of that. And went out to Phoenix for 9-10 months or so. And I love that school. I couldn't get enough. Like all growing up, I got pretty bad grades in school, and it wasn't because I was stupid or anything like that. I just wasn't interested in the work. So I would skip school to skateboard. I would skip school to play guitar. Like I just didn't want to learn about that stuff. Then you get me an audio engineering school. And if I got anything below 100% on the test, I was like, no, what? How could I do that?
Yeah.
And going to like all the extra classes, like all the extracurricular stuff that you didn't need to. I was such a nerd, all about it.
So I also visited that school because maybe in my 30s, you were probably in your 20s. I was contemplating audio engineering school, but then, and I liked that school, but I started thinking, you know, I think I mentioned this to Jeremy, like with technology, like GarageBand and Logic and prices of microphones and equipment going down, I'm thinking people are going to start doing this at home more and more and more. The big studios are going to go out of business, or some studios are going to go out of business. Did you ever think about that when you were pondering this, or you just were like, I love it, I'm going to do it, and we'll just see what happens?
I didn't think about that too much, and yeah, it is kind of the obvious route, and that is definitely what's happened and is still happening always. I think I went there with the intent of just learning as much as I could. I didn't really have any really thought out goals, I guess. It's probably a bad thing. I remember when I was signing up for the school, the person I was talking to was like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to move to LA afterwards, New York? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll probably just come back to Idaho and see what I can do around here. And they're like, I don't think you're going to go back to Idaho. And yeah, so I start learning all this stuff, and the more I'm learning, and I'm like, yeah, I really can't go to Idaho. I have to be in one of the major places, and to really work in the audio engineering side of it, in studios and all that, you pretty much have to be in Nashville, New York, or LA. And I'd had enough with the cold weather. I was like, I'm never living somewhere that has winters again. Like, I love visiting, going back up to Idaho to visit my family. And I mean, I'm in Denver right now. It certainly isn't warm here.
So, Greg, how did you get to where you are now? I mean, tell us, how'd you land the job? I mean, tell us where you are, but how'd you get the job?
So when you finish that school, they have an internship department, and their whole job is to have connections with studios across the country. I don't know if it's across the world, but mainly across the country. All these major recording hubs like the New York, Nashville, LA. And so in all of the biggest studios, they try to foster these relationships to where they know the studios well, they know the people at the studios well. And because you've been at the school with them, they know you pretty well. So they try to do their best to match you to, first off, a place you want to be. You make a list of like several different studios that you'd be interested in working at, and they'll talk with you and let you know, like, hey, we really think this would be a good fit for you. So I decided I was going to move to LA because of the weather. I knew people there. I had friends there. I do have some family there, grandparents live there, and some cousins. So it seemed like a pretty obvious decision for me to go there. But again, I didn't know what studio I was going to be at. My internship coordinator was like, hey, there's this place called Ocean Studios. It's a really awesome studio. They do a lot of rock. It's a lot of the kind of music you're into. And the studio manager, his name's also Greg. Mm-hmm. And my coordinator's name was Greg too. So it's a trifecta of Gregs. I go my whole life not knowing barely any other Gregs, and then I get into music and they're everywhere.
All there. Greg's and
I don't understand it.
Yeah. Jeff, yeah. Greg, those are the big music names. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
You're born into it, whether you like it or not, right. You're a Greg. So he told me about this studio, and I was like, okay, cool. I'll go check it out. And they were hiring, and I went for the interview and stuff, and it just ended up being a really great match. And I was there. I started out as an intern, so you're not getting paid. You're just, making coffees, picking up food, scrubbing toilets, all that stuff. And you do it. I'm kind of the mentality where I'm like, I don't care what I'm doing. I'm going to do it way better than anybody else can do it. Like, I'm going to make that. Ever. Yeah. These toilets are going to be so clean. You're going to eat off them. And since I bring you your food, I'm going to serve it to you on this toilet.
Yeah.
Okay. That never happened. But so I moved up from that to runner, where it's basically the same duties, except you're getting paid.
Okay.
And then you also get your chance to go sit in the control room where they're actually recording and stuff like that, and be a little bit more a part of the sessions. And then from there, you go up to assistant engineer, because most times clients will come in with their own engineer. And then each studio is quite a bit different. So you really need an assistant there to show you how to do the things you want to do. Assistants are doing quite a bit more of the work, the behind the scenes stuff, than most people would expect. So I was doing that at that studio for probably 7 years or so, maybe 8 years. And then they shut down. It was a weird situation. I won't get into too much of it, right. But the people that owned it, I don't think they cared about making or losing money. So I don't think it was a situation of that, which most studios do have to worry about making money. And like Jeff was saying earlier, now with recording equipment being so readily accessible, and record budgets, because of, streaming and internet and all that, and maybe we'll get into that later. Because of all that, the record budgets are so much lower to where most people don't have the budget to record it at an expensive studio, because it does cost a lot to be at these places and record properly. And so that wasn't the reason they shut down, but that is the reason that a lot of these bigger studios are closing down, unfortunately. And so they shut down a year and a half ago, maybe. And from there, it was it was a bit of a struggle, because LA is an expensive city to live in. And right. I'd been at this same studio the whole time. So it's like I made a lot of connections, but with the industry the way it is, it's looking pretty grim. It's not looking real hopeful. And I even had this thought of like, oh man, if I have to like quit music and live back in Idaho, it's cold. I don't want to do this. And just all of this stuff. Idaho's not the place for me. It's beautiful, but I love being in LA. So I eventually got my traction and have been a freelance engineer.
Awesome.
With several different studios around town. And it's pretty cool. They've been keeping me busy for the most part. Then coronavirus hit and wiped out my.
Yeah, that's been a mess. So of course we want you to name drop, and of course, you know, if there's stuff you can't talk about, that's great. But I can share things you posted on social media, right?
Yeah, of course.
You worked with. So I've seen, and I would just get mad at Greg. I would say, I hate Greg Foeller. I hate him because he's posting these pictures here. Oh, look, there's Greg Foeller with Paul Gilbert. Look, there's Greg with Billy Sheehan. Oh, there's Greg with Nathan East. Oh, there's Greg was Portnoy. Did you ever work with Portnoy?
Twice. So I'll tell you a funny story about the majority of those people you just mentioned. This is kind of funny. So we get this project, and this was back when Ocean was still open. It was a Mike Portnoy, Derek Sherinian project. And if you're at all familiar,
right? Is that what it was? Sons of Apollo. Okay.
Yeah. But at the time when they first came in, they didn't even have a name.
Wow.
It was just like Mike Portnoy, Derek Sherinian, Billy Sheehan, and Ron Bumblefoot Thal.
Yeah.
I don't even think they had officially announced that I know they didn't announce that Jeff Scott Soto was their singer at the time. And he might not have officially been in when they first got in the studio. I don't know. But I was a big Dream Theater fan, like love them. And so Derek Sherinian used to play keys in there, and Portnoy was one of the founding members and was in there for a really long time. And I was a really big Portnoy fan. Even not being a drummer, he's just amazing.
He's incredible. Yeah.
He's like the heavy metal Neil Peart.
Yeah, he's awesome.
So I was really excited to work with them. So that session came in, and that was maybe a week or two. I can't remember. I think it was like closer to 2 weeks. And that was a lot of fun because it was heavy metal music with these dudes that I really looked up to. And Ron Thal, oh my gosh,
he's incredible.
Man. He is insanely good. So underrated. And
he's an awesome singer. He's
an amazing singer.
He toured with Asia and sang.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
I can believe that.
I'm like, no way. Because I thought Ron Bumblefoot's with Asia, and then I watched the video, and it's like he's singing. It blew me away.
He is unbelievable in every aspect. He's hilarious and just a nice dude. And like, even if you took away his musical talents, he'd still be awesome. But his musical talents they're not human. He's ridiculous. I think at one point when we were recording in that first session, Derek was trying to figure out this keyboard part. And Ron reached across from the back of the keyboard and like played it. I was like, what the heck is the matter with this?
Yeah, do it like this.
So,
but
Greg,
in reverse.
When you're assisting, are you assisting? It seems like assisting is a better way to go now because people show up with their own engineers and you kind of show them the studio, get the mic set up. Right?
Yeah, mostly I'll be assisting, but a lot of times people will still come in without an engineer. And so in those cases, I'll be their engineer. Or if I'm working with a friend's band as their engineer, those are the times I'll be engineering. But a lot of times I'll get called for assistant gigs.
What takes the most time, and what are the key elements when you're setting up a band? Because I think people imagine a band comes in and you hit record and it sounds amazing. Versus like miking things properly and worrying about phase and cancellation and just trying out different microphones on different instruments. I mean, that takes time.
So from an assistant standpoint, sometimes those decisions are yours. Sometimes they're not. A lot of times the engineer will know because they've already typically been working with the band for a while before they actually come into the studio to record. They'll do a lot of pre-pro so they know, okay, this is the band's sound. This microphone's going to sound best for this guitar player's part, and so usually you'll get a list of all of the info, how they want it set up. And then you do the technical stuff of setting it up, patching all the outboard gear, all the equipment in. But yeah, then sometimes the engineers will say like, hey, what do you think would be a good mic choice for this? Da, da, da. And that's when the science part comes in, where you have to know like each microphone's frequency response curves, things like that, to where you're like, all right, this microphone would be very well suited for this application. And if you're wanting this effect, this piece of gear will do it, and things like that.
Is the SM57 still the mic of choice for loud guitars?
It gets used on every session I've worked on, with the exception of a recent session. And it's so strange not to use a 57 that I pointed it out to the producer I was working with. I was like, you realize we're not using a single 57 on this session. That's pretty interesting. Because it
Bomber,
gets used,
right? You can throw those things across the stage.
Yeah.
And apparently they
I always
just hold
heard
up.
if you need to use it as a hammer or something, you can just bash a nail in and then plug it back in and you're ready to go. But it's
whack your lead singer.
It's been on it's been on the president's podium since like 1964 or something.
Probably the same one too.
Probably so. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's an interesting little fact.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
So I'm a nerd. Okay. I listened to an interview from Beau Hill. Beau Hill produced Rat. He produced, I think he did some Poison. I don't remember who all he's done, but he tells a story of when he did the first Rat album. They had an old beat up Marshall and an old beat up Marshall head. And they said, well, we got to try out some amps. And they spent like 3 days finding different amps and enclosures. And they spent all this time doing it. And finally they found an amp that everyone was happy with. And it was the original amp they brought in, the original cab, and they wasted all that time. He recorded both guys on the same old Marshall. They'd do their Warren DeMartini and Robin Crosby would do their own parts, but all using the same amp. And I read these stories of it, it took us a week to get the drum sound, and all this. I'm like, oh, see, because I don't think people picture that part. And that's kind of the question I wanted to ask you. How close is your actual job to what you thought it would be? When you had this dream of becoming an audio engineer, how close is what you're doing to what you actually thought it would be?
That is a good question. It's interesting because, again, I don't know if I had this vision in my head of exactly what it might be or what I'd even want it to be. All I knew is I love music so much. It's that and skateboarding have been my biggest passions in life. And I was like, I have to work doing something that I love, because I can't be happy being a supervisor over at Capital One or whatever,
Exactly. Totally.
I have to be doing something that I love, and skateboarding didn't seem feasible anymore. I used to tour a lot for it, but to make an actual career out of it, I was like, no. I looked more into music, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to work in music badly, and I had to work in music. Otherwise my soul would be drained.
That's awesome.
I didn't have any preconceived notions or anything, which also led to, I didn't have any letdown. You can't be let down if you're not really expecting much.
That's good.
So when a session finishes, obviously there's some editing that happens, right? Mm-hmm. Is that part of your job, or does the artist producer bring in someone, or they take the tracks, the masters, and edit them somewhere else?
Yes.
Or both, all of the above.
all of the above, really.
A piggyback off that is, how intentional is keeping the music more human, loose, kind of loosey-goosey in the pocket groove versus like quantized or right on the beat.
Yes.
Because that seems to be, obviously, with pop music, electronic, of course, but pop music even is doing it so much. So, in that studio, maybe, where it's more rock, what was it like in regards to those things?
A lot of times, that area wouldn't be my job, because most of the time the people would come into the studio specifically for tracking. And that's just a different way of saying the recording part. They get all of their parts recorded and then get out of there, again, because there's not as much money in it. They don't have a budget to sit and hang and stay in the studio and take a week to get a drum sound, take a week to run through all of these different amps before they find one. Some projects do, and those are so fun to be on, but they're very, very, very rare anymore.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, because a lot of times you get just a single day long session and you don't really get to know the people too well. But yeah, so they'll record at the studio, and then they'll usually take their tracks home to maybe their producer or engineer's home studio or something like that, where they'll edit it and things like that. And I've done a lot of the editing, and I certainly do that with a lot of my own music. And that's the closest my job gets, I feel like, to being like an accountant or something that I hate. The monotony of like comping tracks and editing and all of that.
Yeah.
And when I first started out doing it, I just had this tendency to try too hard to get them all perfectly quantized and all of that and perfectly in tune and all. And it completely drains the feel of the music, completely drains the humanity and what makes the music so awesome to begin with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, as I kind of developed a little bit more and learned a little bit more, I was like, yeah, this isn't doing any favors. Certain music
the
and
producer that's requesting that to quantize, or is it just they say do what you want? Do you know what I mean?
Oftentimes it'll be the producer, maybe the musicians, and it goes by the style of music. If it's like more old school rock and roll, you're going to get a lot more of that mentality of close enough for rock and roll.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also kind of the beauty of it, because you feel the music more than you feel like a machine's pummeling this sound at you.
Right.
Sure.
Jeff, you like the editing part, don't you?
I like editing in general. I like editing video a lot.
Okay.
And all those effects and transitions and things. Sound design, I like editing.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done much with like a full track list from a band.
Right. Right.
I don't know if I might like it in the beginning, but
yeah, then it would get.
Yeah, I think if you can get creative with it, then it's fun. If it becomes monotonous, or like Greg was talking about this quantize, and then that I wouldn't like. Yeah,
I used to like the video editing a lot too. I think what I'm despising the most is, picture like you have a lead vocal, and there's, sometimes people get really crazy with the overkill. You might get like 20 tracks of the same section of the song sung 20 times, and then you got to go through and pick out each word, sometimes even syllables, like this S is better from this take, and then Frankenstein them together. You do that with guitars, vocals, drums, and then you hear the same phrase over and over 1,000 times, and you're not even hearing it anymore. Like, if anyone's in the room listening to you comp vocals, they're probably on the verge of killing themselves. But your mind is in a different place, but you're just listening for these minor intricacies and differences between the two. And that gets really monotonous after a while, and it's not super fun, and it's not super creative. Where editing becomes creative, that can be more fun, and I'm into that a little more. But that's more probably song arranging as opposed to like comping, making a composite.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
I wouldn't like that either.
what I'm interested in, and I've even kind of asked Jeff this question too. How does what you do for a living? Okay, how does being an audio engineer, a guy that's recording music now, how has that changed the way you listen to music now?
That is interesting, and that is a good question. So sometimes, if I don't like the song, or I'm not necessarily into the song that I'm listening to, that's when I'll allow my hypercritical brain to kick in and be like, oh, that's a horrible drum sound, or, oh, that's clearly an auto-tuned vocal. It takes me out of the mood and I hate it. But on the complete reverse side of that, being that I started out as a musician, and that's my biggest passion, even before the engineering or anything like that, the song itself is always what matters to me. Like, I'm a big Misfits fan too. And you want to talk about terrible quality, and they're not doing a whole lot of crazy intricate stuff playing wise either. So very simple and not well recorded by any means, but the songs for whatever reason grab you. So in those cases, I can turn off that part of my brain and actually enjoy the music. And if it's a good song, it's a good song. I can enjoy it. But then there are the times when it's like, if it's a song where I'm not super into it, then I will start to notice all of these teeny little things that'll perhaps drive me crazy.
Yeah. What about you, Jeff? Do you listen now differently than you did when you were a kid in high school listening to hard rock? What do you hear?
I gotta say, one of the things I loved about music and rock and roll and heavy metal when I was in high school was paying attention to all the parts.
Mm-hmm.
I was just drawn to like the guitar solos and who's playing what, and whoa, did you hear that bass line?
Exactly.
That